Well, hello everybody. Today we're going to be talking about middle childhood. So we're really talking about basically the elementary school years. And what is happening in terms of physical development? Well, physical development is continuing. In terms of brain development, certainly the frontal lobe development is kind of the main brain growth that we see during middle childhood. But you also have the continual development of the cortex, the outer part of the brain. Myelination is continuing, and synaptogenesis, those are those increasing synapses or connections between neurons, are also happening during this stage. Motor skills are also developing and expand quite dramatically as, again, if you can think back to your own childhood, how different your motor skills are when you're a kindergartner compared to a sixth grader, right? There's a huge improvement in motor skills, but dramatic individual differences, absolutely. You've got some children who are extremely physically coordinated, or particularly in certain sports or physical activities, and others who are not as coordinated, and kind of more struggling along in the physical domain in terms of their motor skills. We do see physical fitness tending to decrease into the teenage years, and childhood activity is really related to caregiver activity. This is social learning and what's going on in the home, right? So if caregivers are more active, we tend to see that children are more active as well. Physical development, obesity, and health. Lifelong weight struggles are often created by high preschool body mass index, or BMI. So really being concerned about weight in childhood is extremely important because it often sets the stage for lifelong issues. And there are clear negative emotional effects that are related to obesity, that children have lowered self-esteem and all sorts of negative emotional effects. In terms of physical development, gross motor skills, so those large motor skills have no relation to academic success. There's no correlation or relationship. But fine motor skills, and those are, those very detailed, smaller motor skills, do seem to be related to school performance and memory performance, so in a positive way. So children who seem to have better fine motor skills tend to have better school performance. Kind of an interesting relationship. Talking about childhood obesity briefly here. So childhood obesity is a body mass index at or above the 95th percentile compared to U.S. norms established for children. And you can see that there's, you don't need to know these numbers, but a very large increase in percent of obese children during these middle childhood years, ages 6 through 11. In 2010, 2 out of 5 U.S. children were either overweight or obese. So this is becoming a growing problem, and as we said, it really sets the child up potentially for lifelong problems, so it is something to be concerned about. So what are some factors that may be leading to this increase in overweight? Children, working parents perhaps with less time to prepare nutritious foods and sit-down meals. Often parents are working, maybe running to pick up the children at an after-school program after school and going through a drive-through or a quick restaurant, and those might not be the healthiest food options. In the United States, we've got oversized portions of food. You can kind of look, there's very interesting articles and videos about the size of the portions of our foods, particularly in restaurants. And so children are learning to eat larger portions of food than perhaps they need, and so these large servings and large calorie content can lead to overweight. Low-cost, calorie-dense food preferences in childhood, so children really like the taste of high-calorie foods, and often these high-calorie, again, like fast foods, things like that, are less expensive than some of the more nutritious options. And so for many reasons, children may eat more of these high calorie foods, and a lack of exercise. Again, with technology, children are inside more, not outside running around, playing, riding their bikes as much as before. And so the combination of eating more unhealthy foods and less exercise can lead to higher percentages of overweight children. Rapid weight gain during infancy and early childhood is a strong predictor of later obesity. And so again, paying attention to weight in childhood is extremely important, even in very early childhood, because it does seem to predict later outcomes. In terms of limiting overweight, limit excessive feeding during the first year of life. This is something that parents are apt to do. Again, if a child is colicky and difficult, sometimes it's easy to just feed the child and usually they're happy again, but that can lead to a bad, kind of a negative reinforcement pattern that isn't helpful as time goes on. Understanding that limiting intake is difficult for overweight children, so children don't understand always this relationship between eating and weight, and also it's hard for adults to limit their intake of food, particularly if it's something they enjoy. And so for a child whose frontal lobes are still not developed yet, it's really hard. So it really needs to be, again, the parent being the frontal lobe for their child, limiting intake of these high calorie foods, providing more nutritious options, what I don't have here, but encouraging exercise, very important. And providing programs for children who are really struggling with weight that are not perceived as insulting or damaging to the child's self-esteem, but more about overall health and improving health, and that getting children involved in that, again, early on, so they're learning healthier lifestyle choices, which will serve them well as they get older. All right, what about cognitive development? Well, we'll go back to Piaget, and in middle childhood, children are at Piaget's concrete operational stage. So this is the transition from pre-operations to concrete operations. It develops gradually. By 8 years old, children are firmly in this stage, according to Piaget. May transition to concrete operations in different areas at different times. So it's not maybe 100%, but generally by age 8, Piaget would say children are in the concrete operational stage. And at this point, they understand those conservation tasks that we looked at in early childhood, where children had a difficult time with the water, pouring water from one type of glass into a different shaped glass and understanding the same amount of water is in the glass. Children can do that by 8 years old. Understanding identity constancy, right? When someone puts a mask on, it's not as though the person has disappeared and become somebody else. They're able to look beyond immediate appearances, and they begin to understand basic principles of math. Again, this is our school age years, and so children are getting to the stage of being able to do these types of higher, more cognitively complex problems. Here I'm just going to, again, we've already talked about concrete operational thinking, and basically this is the ability to reason and giving children problems where they have to reason out the solution. They're more able to do at this stage versus at the pre-operational stage. Evaluating Piaget. So Piaget's areas of cognitive study were limited. You really didn't think about how memory worked, how concentration worked, what about planning or attention. He was really focused, like we talked about, on logic and reasoning and things like that. And he didn't believe in active teaching. He believed children would automatically grow out of their pre-operational stage into concrete operational stage. And so again, this Piaget was very much of a nature, the idea of nature, biology, that as the brain developed, children were more able to do certain tasks, and this was independent of the environment. But you might imagine that the environment is important, right? I can think that learning and examples of learning being extremely important in our cognitive development. And here's an example. This girl in this picture gets so much practice weaving, maybe she would have better spatial skills than a child who didn't spend all this time weaving. But Piaget kind of left out this whole idea of the environment in teaching. He was really focused on the biology of cognitive development. What about memory? Memory is starting to develop and improve during middle childhood. There's many different philosophies and theories on how memory improves and how memory works. Your book talks about an information processing perspective. Information processing is the idea almost of your brain as a computer, and that we have this type of memory called working memory, in which our brain is able to work with certain information, hold information in our mind as we're working with it to solve a problem, and that improves over middle childhood, that we're more able to kind of have a greater capacity to hold things in our memory as we're working with them. As you can imagine, with math and language and all sorts of problems that children are learning to solve, you've got to hold information in memory and then sort of work out the problem. And this is improving during the middle childhood years. And we see an increase in school-related executive functions. Executive functions are functions that we say are underlied in the frontal lobe or housed in the frontal lobe. And the frontal lobe is developing, and so our executive functions are developing. Executive functions, planning, rehearsing. We see increased rehearsal, right? If you're learning something, how about remembering your multiplication facts, where you have to rehearse information over and over, or you're starting to take your first tests and you have to study material and rehearse it. Well, that's getting better, and that's a frontal lobe process. The ability to understand and selectively attend improves. Selective attention is really important. The idea that there's lots of things going on around you, but you need to be able to selectively pay attention to what's important to you at that moment. So again, a kindergarten class, there's so much happening, and if you watch a child in a kindergarten class, they're looking everywhere. Everything's catching their attention. By the time child is in 6th grade, they're understanding, even if there's a lot of things going on in the classroom, somebody's tying their shoe, somebody's book drops, they're more able to concentrate on the teacher, knowing that that's the important thing that they should be selecting to, or the important person they should be attending to. And inhibition increases. Inhibition is another frontal lobe activity, inhibiting responses that are maybe kind of you feel like doing, they might come naturally, but we're learning to not say things that would hurt other people's feelings in school, not get up and run around the classroom, even if you don't feel like sitting still, right? You're inhibiting those kind of impulsive actions that you see in toddlers and maybe more so in early childhood. And particularly with socialization, because children start to learn, right? If you say something mean about somebody, that will hurt their feeling. They won't be your friend. And so maybe some responses or some consequences like that, where they say, oh, I really don't like your shirt. And then the child goes, oh, I'm not going to be your friend, right? Or getting up and running around the room because they don't want to sit still anymore in the classroom, and they get in trouble with the teacher. So these inhibition skills are increasing, and socialization is a real goal. Children are really learning and trying to learn how to fit in to the norms and rules of society. In terms of interventions and strategies using information processing theory at home and at work, some general principles for younger children who don't have those frontal lobe executive functioning abilities. Use prompts to aid memory. So if children aren't remembering, very young children, oh, maybe they have homework to do. Asking them, do you have homework to do, right? Be your child's frontal lobes. Or are they forgetting to bring their lunch to school in their backpack, or bring their jacket home after school? Children may need a lot of prompting because they don't have, again, that frontal lobe development yet. So that's a way to help the child by giving them prompts. And certainly you're expecting difficulty in inhibition and impulsivity. Children are very impulsive. Children are disinhibited. They'll say things that perhaps they shouldn't say, or do things that perhaps they shouldn't do, and that's to be expected. Not necessarily that the child is being a troublemaker, or trying to start trouble, or is a mean child, right? You need to kind of understand the developmental level of the child. But through middle childhood, we can use active teaching of study skills, right? This is how you study, rehearsing information, practicing, and teaching those skills to a child, and selective attention as well, where to focus their attention at any particular time. Using Vygotsky's idea of scaffolding as a parent, a caregiver, a teacher, anyone who works with children. Scaffolding organizational strategies. They're not going, a child in second or third grade is not going to be able to come up with a great strategy to organize everything they need to do in a day, but you can scaffold, you can help, you can put up charts, program things in their iPods or iPads or whatever device they have, using verbal prompts. And then as the child learns how to organize their, whatever it is they're doing, their morning to getting ready for school, or their afternoons in terms of doing homework and chores, then you can remove the scaffold as the child becomes more expert in the task. Expect difficulty with multitasking. Multitasking is difficult. It's difficult for adults, but in childhood, very difficult. And so not trying to give too many tasks at once to a child would be a helpful thing, and helping to reduce distractions. So in a classroom, in a home, if a child needs to be doing one thing, removing distractions, because again, those frontal lobes aren't yet developed to say, oh, I need to kind of tune out that particular distraction and do what I need to do. A quiet place to do homework is important, and just allowing the child the space to focus without those extra distractions. We can talk here about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. This is the most common childhood disorder in the United States. It's usually diagnosed in elementary school, particularly when children are going into preschool and kindergarten. Why is that? Because what's happening? And it's at that time that children are expected to sit still, stay in their seat, listen to a teacher. And so if a child is having problems with paying attention or being too hyperactive, moving around too much, it's noticeable when a child is first in school, right? When they're at home, running around and not paying attention as a toddler, perhaps it's not as noticeable because you don't really have to sit still. But in the classroom, that's when you can start to differentiate children who may have difficulties in this area. And interestingly, ADHD is diagnosed more among boys. So what are the symptoms that we see in attention deficit hyperactivity disorder? Well, problems with paying attention, so problems focusing, concentrating, being very distracted, losing things, so attention problems, and then hyperactivity, being very impulsive, moving around too much. Parents will say their child is like, it's like they have a motor and you can't turn them off. They're just going around. Everything is interesting to them. They're, distracted. What's that noise? What's going on there? So hyperactivity. And children can have one type of symptom, the inattentive symptoms of being distracted and forgetting things, or they can have the hyperactive symptoms, the moving around constantly, the impulsivity, or they can have both to have this diagnosis. We do seem to see a lot of executive functioning deficits in children diagnosed with ADHD. So problems with that working memory, holding things in memory and working with that information, problems with inhibition, right? They aren't able to inhibit what they want to do in terms of getting up or not raising their hand in class, just speaking out, things like that. Being very impulsive, running into the street. If they throw their ball and it goes into the street, running across the street without looking, and trouble doing tasks under pressure. Causes of ADHD we think are primarily genetic, and we see a delayed maturation of the frontal lobes particularly, and that makes sense because the deficits and the difficulties we see in children diagnosed with ADHD are in those areas that we believe are kind of housed in the frontal lobes. We see lower dopamine output, so low levels of dopamine, and sometimes a child may be diagnosed with ADHD, or a parent or somebody feels as though the child has ADHD due to a poor child environment fit. What does this mean? If you're taking a very active child and they're in school all day, and then maybe parents are working and they have to go to like an after-school study program, and the child doesn't ever have a chance to get their energy out, well, then that may be a poor fit. And a teacher may say, oh, this child, I think, has ADHD, without realizing that, this child hasn't had a chance to really get out and play and move around and do some kind of sports or activity. And so we also have to think about the entire situation, the environment that the child lives in. Parents will sometimes come and say, I think my child has ADHD. So it's a term that parents are familiar with. You hear about it on the news, you hear about it from their friends. And so they think, oh, my child has ADHD, but maybe the child or the parent has expectations for a child that are at a much higher developmental level than the child actually is. So a parent who expects a child to, like a 6 or 7-year-old child, to come home, sit down, do their homework, do their chores without any complaints, without any problems. While some children can do that, it's not typical of a 7-year-old, right? 7-year-olds are impulsive, and 7-year-olds do forget things and are distracted. That's typical childhood. And so sometimes parents need to learn what is acceptable and what to be expected at a certain age. And so being very aware of the developmental level of a child is really important in this diagnosis. In terms of treatments for ADHD, there are medications that are very effective in treating ADHD. And I will say there is a lot of controversy about this diagnosis in terms of children being overdiagnosed, that there are children who are typically developing but nonetheless get this diagnosis. It's really important that children are brought to child development experts when looking at a potential diagnosis. Because this diagnosis of ADHD is really one of kind of a quantity difference between what is expected at a particular age and what that particular child is showing, because all of the symptoms of ADHD are pretty much normal childhood symptoms of being a normal child, right? Distracted, lose things, impulsive, that's being a child. And so the question is the child significantly more impulsive, significantly more distracted than another child at that same age? And so again, that's where you really need an expert and to ensure that you're not overdiagnosing just normal children as having ADHD. However, if a child does get the diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, medications can be extremely useful. And it's interesting because these medications are stimulants. It's a stimulant, right? A stimulant, this almost seems counterintuitive. You have a child who is impulsive and hyperactive. Why would you give this child a stimulant? Well, what we find is that these children have frontal lobes that are underactive, right? Frontal lobes that are not functioning as a typical frontal lobe for, again, that particular age. And so because the frontal lobe is underfunctioning and the frontal lobe's job is to help the child pay attention and do what they're supposed to be doing and not be distracted, this leads to symptoms of ADHD. And so actually these stimulant medications stimulate the frontal lobe, and by stimulating the frontal lobe, you actually get a child that is less impulsive and more attentive. So it almost seems counterintuitive, but that is the way these medications work. And then a lot of parent training, helping a parent, again, even more so, helping a parent to give their children guidelines, charts, being that frontal lobe for the child, because it is not only for all children, the frontal lobe is still developing, but particularly in ADHD, we see even a slower development. And so really putting up those environmental factors that will help the child be successful, being sure there's a quiet place with no distractions for homework, maybe a checklist of what they need to do every morning to get ready for school. Do you have your jacket? Do you have your lunchbox? Do you have your homework? Putting those things in place, training the parent so that the parent can then aid the child in terms of being successful. All right, ERIKSON'S psychosocial stages. So moving through kind of personality development, we've gone through a number of stages, and now we're in what Erikson called late childhood, 6 years old to puberty. In our book, we're calling it middle childhood, and this is the industry versus inferiority stage. So the big psychosocial crisis here is industry versus inferiority. The idea is that children are trying to do a lot, being very industrious. These are the school age years, so they're producing a lot of work, math work, writing, reading, they're learning a lot. And the goal is we want a child to be industrious. And so this stage is resolved positively if the child shows increased competency in social interactions and academic skills, basically facing tasks of the real world. And so this industry can be in many different areas. So scholastic competence, right? Learning how to do things at school. Behavioral competence, right? Learning how to kind of behave properly. Athletic competence, peer likability and popularity, even physical appearance and looks can be part of this. And so a parent, a caregiver at this stage is wanting to praise the child's industry, praise their effort, praise how much they're learning, how much they're doing, and not say things like, oh, child brings home a story they wrote. And you say, oh, it's an okay story. I could certainly write a better one, right? They'll feel inferior. So you're trying to get them to feel proud of the work they're doing and how much they're learning over this stage. All right, in terms of social skills happening during middle childhood, there's a lot developing during the school age years. We want to encourage pro-social behaviors, sharing, helping, caring kinds of behaviors. Altruism is a special kind of pro-social behavior that's carried out for selfless, non-egocentric reasons. So helping somebody even though it has nothing to do with helping you. You're sort of putting yourself out there. That's altruism, to help someone even potentially at risk for yourself. Acting altruistically depends on experiencing specific emotional states. So we've got empathy, which is feeling the exact emotion another person is experiencing. So if you can be, if you say you have empathy for that person, you know exactly how they feel. You've been there, you've felt that before. Versus sympathy. Sympathy is that I feel bad for you, right? I feel upset for someone because you understand that person needs help and you're feeling bad for them. So sympathy is that feeling upset for a person, whereas empathy is knowing exactly how that person feels. In terms of socializing pro-social children, we want to attend to children's pro-social behaviors. That's funny because oftentimes what gets a parent or a caregiver or a teacher's attention, it's the poor behaviors, right? Why did you do that? Why did you yell at your sister? Why did you leave a mess in the room? Those are the types of things. But if we can change and actually focus on the pro-social behaviors, wow, that was good helping of your sister. Wow, that was really nice that you shared with your friend. Focusing on those and giving positive reinforcement for the pro-social behaviors can then lead to more pro-social behaviors. And that's the idea here. So not only attending to it, paying attention to it, and then reinforcing those pro-social behaviors. Social learning, scaffolding altruism, showing as the adult, the more knowledgeable model, showing these types of behaviors, and then intervening when a child behaves in a hurtful, harmful, negative way. Modeling as well. What about doing harm? Get all these words up here. So aggression is any type of hostile or destructive act. It does not have to be physical. There can be verbal aggression as well. So types of aggression: instrumental aggression. This is hurtful behavior that's aimed at gaining something. If you want a toy, you want your place in line, you want your turn on a swing, you're trying to get something. This very often increases from ages 2 to 6 as children are sort of learning about the world and are learning what they want and maybe not the exact right way to get what they want. And so you see this instrumental aggression. And again, more egocentric. How can I get what I want? Thinking about it from my point of view as opposed to from the other person's point of view, right? Ooh, I like your toy. I'm going to just take it from you. Reactive aggression, this is an impulsive retaliation for being hurt. that can be verbal or physical, right? So someone grabs your toy from you, and then reactive aggression would be to hit that child or say, "You're really mean, I don't like you." So that's the reactive aggression. It indicates a lack of emotional regulation, but again, very characteristics of young children. And we need to teach children, right? If somebody does something that's not nice to you, reacting in a negative way is not the best way to handle it. And then relational aggression, these are non-physical acts, insults, social rejection aimed at harming the social connections between the victim and others. And these are like personal attacks, very hurtful, more common as children become socially aware, starting rumors, that sort of thing, manipulating people, saying something mean behind their back. That's relational aggression. Going to watch a little video on friendship in childhood. Ooh. Here we go.
Can you tell me what a best friend is?
Olivia.
Olivia. And what do you expect of a best friend?
I love them and I play with them.
You love them and you play with them? And so how do you know that Olivia is your best friend?
Because I like her and she likes me.
What is a best friend?
A best friend is someone that is a friend, but more than just a friend, a best friend.
Okay.
That you like a lot and you have lots of sleepovers.
Yeah. And so what do you expect of a best friend?
In terms of friendships,
Kindness.
there are changes
And
over time as to
how do you
what a
know
friendship is.
if your best
Core
friend
qualities,
is your best friend?
we all know friends are similar to you.
You
You
know
trust
that
them, they give
they're
you
your
emotional
best
support.
friend if they're not
But the
mean
idea
to
of
you.
what is
And then
similar
and if you have
changes
a big
with
fight,
age.
you
So
just
younger
make up
children
again.
tend to form friendships with people who
So
other
what
children
is
who
a best
share
friend?
the same types of activities they like. Oh, they like to dance together or they play soccer together. That's the similarity. Whereas over time, friendships are more moved towards shared
so what do you
morals,
expect
shared
of a best
ethics, shared values.
Mm-hmm.
Friendships are extremely important in development for so many reasons. They help a child learn to manage their emotions, not to say whatever they want to say because it might hurt their
What
friend.
is a best friend?
If they're very angry, maybe learning how to kind of control that anger and not lash out because there's another person involved. This is
And
really
what do you expect of a
important
best
for learning
friend?
socialization skills.
Sort of
Helping a child handle
trust and
conflict.
to do.
What happens when you and
know,
your friend want to do two different
someone to be there
things,
for
right?
you, someone to
Do
do stuff
you
with, someone
run
who
and
will listen to you,
scream
I
and
guess.
cry? Do you act out? Do you say, I'm not going to be your friend anymore? Do you use physical aggression? Or do you learn how to use your words? Do you learn how to compromise? These are things that are really important to learn, and friendships are a way that children learn this. Also, we know that friends protect and enhance the child's development, that just having one friend helps a child's self-esteem, helps a child feel better about themselves, and so having one friend is extremely important. Friendship versus popularity. Friendship involves relating to a single person in a close one-on-one way, versus popularity being more of a group issue. Who's at the top of that social totem pole at school typically. And there's lots of research on popularity in children. Popular children are the most liked children, average children being sort of middle range status, and rejected children. These can be socially anxious children, children who have more internalizing tendencies, meaning they kind of keep their emotion in, they're more quiet, they're more shy, or rejected children may be more externalizing, meaning they act out, they're loud, they're those aggressive types of children. So they might not fit in with the typical group. Anyone who is considered different, weird, not like us, might be considered in the rejected group. However, being rejected doesn't necessarily lead to bad outcomes later in life. Some children who are rejected, who have maybe more externalizing tendencies, may end up on having difficulties later on, but some of the children who don't fit in, who are different as children, end up being incredibly successful later in life. So this idea of being someone who's rejected by their peers doesn't necessarily mean that they have a poor outcome later on socially. Kindness is very important, seems to be an extremely important personality trait that causes children to be accepted and liked by their peers. That makes sense. We will talk about bullying. Here was a quote from a child. You can get bullied because you are weak or annoying, or because you are different. Kids with big ears get bullied. Dorks get bullied. Teachers' pets get bullied. If you say the right answer in class too many times, you can get bullied. Boy, this really makes you see and maybe remember how difficult it is to be a child, right? As if it's almost anything about you can lead to being picked on if there's someone in the school, in the environment, that is looking for somebody different. And it really doesn't matter what that is. You can sometimes be the target of unfortunate behavior. Here's a quick video on girls bullying other girls.
She just came over and started trying to hit me and scratch me and kick me. And
it was when she was a 6th grader that Stephanie Dennis was bullied by other girls.
you don't want to be, a tattletale or a snitch, and it'll just get worse.
A new student at school, Stephanie was a little chubby. First she was teased, then the bullying escalated to shoving. Eventually she was jumped and beaten.
It's scary because you're worried how far they're going to take it.
Her face was red. She had scratches on her face. And
her parents say over the school years she became increasingly despondent and withdrawn.
What did she go through?
A lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. Her self-esteem
plummeted,
went into the gutter, yeah.
Stephanie's hardly alone. Visit any middle school in America and you'll likely find girls bullying girls. Here at Taylor Middle School in Albuquerque, where Stephanie was targeted, the problem has made it into the 6th grade curriculum.
How many people have either experienced that or seen someone be bullied? Yeah. Don't be silent, just because you're afraid.
This group of girls just came over to me and tripped me for some reason. I don't know why.
They were calling me teacher's pet and stuff.
Is it enough to make you cry?
Sometimes.
Teacher Liz Freisinger created this girls-only class when she realized how widespread the problem is.
How is girl bullying different than boy bullying?
Boy bullying tends to be more on the physical side of pushing, shoving. They'll threaten to fight, and then they actually will, throw punches. And the girl bullying is more subtle. Gossiping, rumors.
But her 8th grade teaching assistant says it often comes to blows.
Oh, yeah. There's so many girls getting suspended constantly for fighting. And most people generalize fighting as a boy thing, but it's not the case at all.
Oh, so there is actual physical fighting.
Oh, yeah. And scratching and pulling in the hair.
The author of Odd Girl Out says the bullying can leave lasting scars.
There are adult women out there who can't remember what happened to them on their wedding night, but can remember with incredible detail the angle of their shirt collar on the day they were humiliated by another girl.
All right, and then cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is bullying using electronic devices used to harass someone with rumor, lies, embarrassing truths, or threats. This is becoming a more pervasive type of bullying. It can ensure that a large audience gets this message. So this rumor, this hurtful threat can go to a much larger audience, which then intensifies the hurt that the person who's the victim of the bullying feels, right? Because it can be spread to a much larger group. And it's emotionally easier to conduct cyberbullying. Cyberbullies find it easier to put out that information in a technological way. It removes a lot of the direct emotional feelings that you have if you're actually having to say something very hurtful to a person's face. There's a sense of distance, and so unfortunately it's becoming more prevalent because, again, it's a little bit easier for people or children who have this tendency to put something out there in this more kind of less direct way. Even though, of course, the hurt is still there, right? They're still being a bully, and it's still just as hurtful. How can we intervene with bullying and helping rejected children? There are bully prevention programs where administrators work with students in a school-wide program with a norm of intolerance towards bullying. It will not be accepted. There are anti-bullying assemblies, bully prevention committees consisting of children from each grade, and it becomes the culture of the school that we do not accept bullying behaviors. Parents of shy children, finding them and connecting them with a friend is key. Even if a parent has to kind of go out of their way to try to find one friend for that child, it really has been shown to be extraordinarily protective emotionally for that child to have one friend. And if the child can't find the friend on their own, again, helping connect the child with a friend is really important. And parents of children with externalizing disorders, so this is children who act out, are more externalizing, aggressive. Parents and caregivers and teachers should display loving, sensitive parenting, teaching emotional regulation skills, helping children realize how to regulate their emotions, not act out right away with that type of aggressive behavior. Take a breath, take a minute, teaching them some strategies. Reattribution of biases. Oftentimes, children who are externalizing or very aggressive have these predisposed biases where they believe that what people are doing and what's happening is that people are somehow doing intentionally to hurt them, right? So if something is going on, a child can't find their pencil and they see it on the floor next to another child, they think, oh, that child must have stolen my pencil. Where perhaps it was very innocent. The pencil fell off the floor and rolled next to that child. And so if your natural bias is to think, ooh, somebody's doing something mean to me, it makes more sense to have this very aggressive, externalizing anger. So teaching children how to reattribute biases, that what's happening, if it's a negative situation, may not be that someone intentionally is trying to hurt you. Think of other explanations, and that can help reduce those externalizing behaviors. And also these traits can be assets. These externalizing, more fearless, more outgoing traits can lead to very highly competent adults. So it's not necessarily a negative thing, but just trying to control the externalizing behaviors within the norms of what's acceptable in whatever environment they're in. You'll be watching a video on promoting self-esteem and the idea of self-efficacy and how to enhance self-efficacy by parents, teachers, caregivers, helping to praise children for their effort. And we found that in some very interesting research by Dr. Carol Dweck, who's been doing this research for many years, that truly the way that people praise children can have a huge impact on their self-efficacy, or how much a child believes that they can accomplish a very difficult task. And if, even from a very young age, you praise the child's innate ability, you praise, you're so smart, you're the smartest child I've ever seen, you're the best artist I've ever seen, that leads to children who are afraid to make a mistake and are afraid of challenges because they still want to always be the best, the brightest, etc. But if you just, again, use verbal praise and praise their effort, wow, you worked so hard on that project that you did. Oh, I see how much effort you're putting into learning these math facts. If you praise the effort, this leads to children who have higher self-efficacy, who believe they can take on tasks, who aren't afraid of making a mistake, because making a mistake will end up actually teaching them something. They can use their mistake to learn from it. So praising effort versus praising intelligence appears to be extremely important in leading to children who believe they can take on challenges in the future. Like I said, you'll watch a video on this, which I think you'll find very interesting. All right, thank you very much.